quasi-experimental. So we've got time 1 where we're collecting data, we've got the intervention which happens over 6 weeks, and then we're collecting data at 4 points in time. When we've collected all of the survey data at time 4, we're actually going to provide the team with feedback with their pain assessment data from time 2, and then we will do another data collection to see if that actually makes any difference. Now, as I said, that actually sounds like fairly straightforward kind of study. Well, it is a relatively straightforward kind of study, except it involves people, it involves hospitals, and it involves science. So it actually took 6 months, even though we had ethical approval, just to actually get ethics and governance and to get buy-in. And whenever you do something with IT, it's always challenging. It's a bit like working with children and animals. You know, think carefully about what you hope for. So there have been some challenges around that. So in some respects, doing this type of research is not as clean and neat and tidy as probably what you do in your labs, and that you're actually having to be true to the research design, but you're actually really having to adapt, be readily available to solve problems that are happening in the lived experience that's called life and health services, and responding accordingly so that the study could go on. So probably in summary, that is really, I've just endeavoured to try and provide you with a quick overview of translational research to give you an idea that there's lots of different models, there's no really one right or wrong model, that it's an evolving field, that it's really about each step of the, and I think it's helpful if you think about the patient journey and think about how do we actually we need research teams along each one of those points. We actually need to be able to make sure that they almost have a relay, that we get the knowledge going, getting smoothly transferred onto the next team and onto the next patient group, and be continually building and expanding upon the knowledge. But most importantly, for people like myself and other healthcare researchers, we need to make sure that the existing knowledge we've got actually gets put into practice and makes a difference today for our patients and families that we're caring for. So thank you. Happy to take questions. And sorry if I've gone over.
No, that's good. Thanks, Jane. Guys, questions?
Totally bamboozled.
I have one. Sorry, that's my niece. That's Arabella. Say
She's
hi.
very gorgeous.
Yeah. She had nice notes. I have a question, perhaps, for everyone to think about in dissemination. So, you talked a little bit, Jane, at one point about the importance of, you had a slide up there about dissemination out into the community. And I certainly think from when we were doing the reviews with cancer, we were with consumers, when they were reviewing all of your supervisors' grants, actually, the one question that came up regularly was how do you disseminate this information? So you're incredibly good and you're very well trained at getting information out into journals. You're taught how to, by the end of your PhD, you'll be taught how to write an article. But getting evidence into practice is about being able to communicate in different forums. Do you have any comments on the importance of that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things is that you need to be able to disseminate knowledge, not only because people have funded you and are dependent on it, but it's actually really also about your professional profile and your commitment to the community, really, and to your university and to the community. So I think it's really important to think about where there are opportunities. Media officers at universities and hospitals are often looking for stories. That's one way of sending. I'll give you an example. And it's hard to think that you would get a dissemination story from ethics, but I'm delighted to be sharing you with one. You get many things, but I've got an email there. I'm doing this with a number of people involved in a small study, which is thinking about a lot of people in our community in their last year of life are really bothered by breathlessness. It's really quite a disabling symptom. There is some evidence that a $2 fan from the $2 shop, handheld fan, just the air blowing over your face, will actually makes a difference. Patients feel it makes a difference, and caregivers feel it makes a difference. So a group of us and it involves researchers from the UK at 2 sites in the UK and 2 sites in Australia, one in Sydney and one in South Australia, actually looking to recruit, and it's a phase 2 study where we're actually wanting to recruit patients with refractory dyspnea, so dyspnea that hasn't responded to optimal treatment, to see whether the use of a handheld fan makes a difference to their ability to be able to exercise and their confidence about staying at home, and if it actually impacts on caregiver burden. Bearing in mind this is a phase 2, so we haven't really decided, pegged the total, and we've got a number of outcome measures. We haven't actually decided which is the best outcome measure, and that's part of the exploration to go to a phase 3 study. So I've probably given you way too much information, but just the point was it went to ethics. It went to ethics in South Australia, and the ethics people sent it on just a quick bio about public information statement onto the media office. So there's actually a story that is running in the southern suburbs of Adelaide, which is actually around, this study. So that's great for us, because we are hoping that it might result in the phone ringing and people saying, I'm really interested in the study, how do I get involved? I think that's the other thing, is that many of the studies that we do are really about trying to benefit patients. So we need to make sure that our patients are aware of the studies. And for instance, in my work at Sacred Heart, because I'm involved in co-leading a clinical trials unit, which is around doing phase 3 studies in palliative care. So these are studies that are actually designed for people in the last year of life. And so many people, and I'm sure you're all sitting there saying, how do you get patients who are in the last year of their life, and some of them are actually very close to dying, consenting to be involved in studies? Well, one of the things that's really important is that we actually need to get the clinicians on board, and for people to realise that in actual fact all of our patients have a right to know about all of the studies that are actually relevant to them, and so that they can make an informed decision. And I say to my clinical staff, every time that patient comes in, I really want them to think about which study is this person most suitable to know about? Which study do they mostly need to know about? I've probably digressed a bit, but the other thing is that in terms of the study that Nicole and I have been doing in terms of the Cancer Research Challenge, is that we've just put in nursing magazines, just, they're not peer-reviewed journals, but just more information pieces. And that's another way of actually getting it out. So I think all of those opportunities, often hospitals are looking for news stories as well. Lena's always looking for stories. So you could always email her.
Fancy website, always looking for stories.
I think it's important because there's people contact you for unexpected reasons. One of my other students is doing some work around delirium, which is a whole knowledge translation project study, and she happened to just send it out. She sent out something to I suggested she publish something in a nursing journal, but it's not a peer-reviewed, it's more about an information piece. Well, she was probably 3 different nursing organisations picked up on it, and then she ended up on a blog. She ended up being asked to do a webinar to present her research, so that meant to a whole group of nurses across Australia. So I think it is really important to think about it, and you never know where it's going to lead. And it's important, you need to put that on your CV as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think very enlightening talk. I was wondering, is there a smooth in the process of going to P1 before? Is there a smooth process, or is there a bottleneck somewhere that you're finding?
Yeah, remember the valleys of death I showed you. That there are lots of valleys of death.
So
that we have to. It's not that smooth.
So it's usually, is it like failure in one of the P1 cars, or is it just?
There's multiple. I don't think you could pin it on any one thing. But I think that, and as I've declared, I'm not involved in lab science, but I think about, when I have meetings or meet with colleagues at the Garvin, and I'm sure it would be the same here. You have a whole business model and a whole team thinking about the intellectual property and who who in business might be interested about the products that you're essentially working on. That, you know, all of that really is about trying to smooth out, get good knowledge or good potential products moved along, taking them to the next stage. But as I said, I'm not involved in that. But, you know, I think about the work that Ian Fraser and his team have done around HPV. What you actually see is they've probably really worked very consistently to keep the momentum up and keep that research moving on to the next phase. But you require big teams and you require a lot of energy. And in some respects, in some research, it may be a baton change, where you, as the lab scientist, may pass the baton on to somebody else, and it's a bit like probably the Olympic flag running from, you know, country to